Hello everybody, you're very welcome back to Law Hero. My name is Jen and I'm a videos about the law and all things associated with the law. And today I thought we would look at a generational question around Gen Z. So I'm a millennial and the Gen Zs come after me as far as I know. And the question is whether they are more narcissistic and entitled than previous generations. Indeed, this is the stereotype we see in the media, the whole me, snowflake generation. But I really want to see if this is true, because I'm not a scientist and I don't know enough, so I wanted to research it. And the reason I wanted to research it was because I went to see the film Bodies, Bodies, Bodies last night, and the whole film is based around a Gen Z, group of Gen Z who go to a house, play Bodies, 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 which is a murder game whereby somebody's the murderer, nobody knows who it is, and everybody ends up dying. And actually then that happens to them in real life. And spoiler alert, it turns out that the first person killed themselves by accident. The second person basically overdosed on Xanax and fell over and was pushed down the stairs by accident, allegedly. The next person was killed because they were deemed to be the murderer by the group even though they didn't do anything. Then there was a gun involved and the rest, two more people got killed simply because of arguments. And the two protagonists who survive at the end, and the last kind of images of them is realizing that the first guy actually killed himself by accident because he was trying to pop a cork off a champagne bottle with a sword on TikTok, and actually ended up slicing his own neck open and killing himself. And the film ends on that note, that it all started with a TikTok video and just ended really badly, and that, you know, can this generation be saved? And I thought to myself, is it true that and I put myself in that bucket of people because I'm just 30, so I would consider myself fairly, like a millennial. I wouldn't say I'm Gen Z, I'm definitely millennial. But is it true that anyone after the boomers are that fickle, self-absorbed, narcissistic? That's the question I was asking myself. Where did this stereotype come from? Is it because boomers told us, like was argued, that we are fantastic, that we should all get a medal for just participating rather than winning, and that we're the most beautiful, most talented child the world has ever seen, and that, we're entitled to anything, we can get whatever we want in this world, we should know our worth, all the usual rhetoric that you hear that boomers, when I say my parents' generation, they didn't have growing up. And the other big one is social media and mental health. Those are the two big pillars, and not owning property and not being able to sustain a career because we keep jumping from career to career. All these are at odds with the way boomers led their life, but of course it was a whole different economic, social, political environment. But the question still remains, are we more narcissistic and entitled? And I've done some research and I'm going to share it with you right now, inspired by Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. In the PLOS One Science Journal, there was an article written to find out whether today's young adults are depicted as overly sensitive, self-absorbed, and narcissistic, and whether this is true. And they actually went through a methodology of online assessment in person to find out whether this was the case. The first question is whether young adults are too entitled. And it's something that, it's a generational conflict. Older adults will always call younger people more entitled. According to Josh Groves, a psychology professor at Bowling Green State University, the claim seemed to gain some legitimacy about 20 years ago when a group of psychologists claimed they had the research to back it up. The claim sparked a huge debate in psychology, with some saying the results were unreliable, but the debate continued, and actually that's where the stereotype came from. So they looked at a group of students from the age of 18 to 25 at a private university in the Midwest of America, and through questioning, researchers asked the student about their personality, age group stereotypes, and their opinions on narcissism as a trait. So interestingly enough, the majority of respondents genuinely believe that younger adults are inherently more narcissistic than adult generations, and that finding held true regardless of whether the labelling was presented in a positive or negative light. However, the researchers found that older young adults were less likely to view their generation as highly narcissistic or entitled compared with their younger respondents. In addition, while the younger adults consistently said their age group was more narcissistic than older generations, they were offended by the label. And they found that young adults expressed negative opinions of narcissism as well as negative responses to being labelled narcissistic or entitled. So just breaking that down, I think that's fairly self-evident. Nobody wants to be labelled narcissistic or entitled. It's inherently a negative thing to say about somebody. It also stacks up that as a younger person, you would find older generations less narcissistic and entitled because they've been through more. And also, the older you are, the more wiser you get, seemingly. I suppose the argument then is if the younger generations perceive narcissism and entitlement as negative, then they're self-aware of the fact and probably don't want to be that. So I think actually that's quite a good argument. I think it also could be argued that the stereotype has come from social media behavior, in that now that everybody has a phone, everybody has a social media account, that could also be feeding into the perception. Because if you think about it, that wasn't there in previous generations, that like self-aggrandizing, and you know that, like, for example, me, I have my own YouTube channel. Not everybody would have had a voice back in the day. You would have had to get on television, or you would have had to get on the radio, so that would also play a role. I think in conclusion what they found was that this perception of entitlement and narcissism is overhyped. Interestingly then, when I was looking up, I found an interesting article from Bonnie Greer, and she was speaking at a Future Human pop-up event, and she was talking about TikTok. And particularly she was talking about Charlie D'Amelio from Hype House on TikTok. And she said that because we did not grow up with TikTok, we can't connect with what this platform does. Gen Zs have an insight and intuition with this particular technology that we won't possess simply for having coming of age without it. Greer reminded us we all have put on a performance in the mirror, but in the Hype House, the mirror is a tool in the content creation process, and the intimate moment of goofy mimicry is one to share with a global audience. This is what she referred to as a narcissistic tendency. But she said it's not narcissistic, they're into narcissist. So there's this whole concept of a no filter writ large. They don't move or do anything without feedback from a mirror. Gen Z are partly about self-reflection, much more so than their older brothers and sisters, the millennials. They are interested in content that's fed back to them through themselves. What Greer wanted us to see was these savvy content creators have an intelligence all their own, and they will adapt and hone their skills on whatever tool comes next for them. What I'm taking away from this article, and I agree a lot with what Greer is saying, is that this intergenerational conflict is a classic one, but more than anything, we can see that the stereotype is one that comes from fear of the unknown, and the fact that we have misinterpreted Gen Z's feedback, need for feedback and social validation as narcissism. Maybe we should flip it on its head and say these people are actually quite socially intelligent, because rather than, we'll say, performing privately at home without feedback. They're putting their work to the test and actually putting it out in the public for review, which is ultimately the only way to know if what you're doing is of a high standard. I find that really interesting, and it's if you think about it, it's how human beings progress. We progress through feedback and testing ideas at large in the public. If you're keeping all this information, and whether it be good or bad, or talent good or bad, at home, you'll never really know how you stack up against the rest of the human population. So in conclusion, and just to end on a positive note, I think the film was funny, and I think it accurately depicted Gen Zs. However, I think we need to be a little bit more nuanced in our approach to intergenerational conflict. And I think we need to acknowledge that a lot of the time calling a certain group narcissists has a lot of the time comes from our fear of what they know or what they can do. It's like, you know, it's like that classic, like, grandmother or grandfather being like, in my day, this is what we used to do. And it comes from a place of fear, and a fear of becoming irrelevant. I think that's what it is. It's a fear of becoming irrelevant. So on that note, I feel much more equipped to deal with my Gen Z clients, especially when I'm reviewing law firm applications. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.